It's definitely a tough time for everyone, but I think everyone seems to be adapting quite well, and it is what it is, and I think everyone needs to learn to live with where we are at the moment. We can't just dwell and say, I hate this, I'm not going to try, or you just got to keep pushing forward.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep.
The hospitality industry is known for a workforce with the ability to adapt and evolve at the drop of a hat. Many operators, no matter how well a restaurant model is travelling, give their establishment a makeover every couple of years to keep on top of the game or ahead of the pack. For some, the pandemic halted plans for 2020 and put them in doubt ongoing. Adam Wolfers is the executive chef of Gerard's Bistro and Gerard's Bar in Brisbane. Adam, you're about to give Gerard's Bar a complete makeover with a new menu, but a little pandemic happened. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was sort of really interesting timing, wasn't it? The whole pandemic. So we basically we're about to relaunch our Gerard's Bar, whole new menu. We're going to sort of do small things in the fit out and hired new staff for it. And about 2 days before we had to pull the plug. So it was pretty devastating, all the work we'd sort of been putting into it, and then have to put it on hold for now. So yeah, it's pretty brutal.
What's this period of time been like? You've run two venues and you've sort of forced into a takeaway model, and Queensland's actually done quite well compared to New South Wales and Victoria in regards to cases. What's it been like in this period trading as a restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, we've been quite fortunate up here in Queensland. It's sort of, for now it hasn't really hit us quite as badly as Victoria and New South Wales, especially Victoria. So we've been quite lucky in that sort of sense, because obviously we are a slightly smaller population, and there's up here it's a little bit warmer as well, which probably helps too. We sort of have been quite lucky. Well, there was a time there that was quite, for everyone in Australia, where the sort of unknown happened, and no one knew what was happening and what was going to happen. So at the time it was pretty scary, even up here, even though it didn't really hit us as hard as New South Wales and Victoria. But I think, luckily, it's been quite fortunate for us to sort of come on this side of it at the moment. So, yeah, that's sort of...
You switched to a takeaway model pretty quickly. Was it hard to adapt your menu to cater for that sort of market that was so different to dining in the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of weeks of when it wasn't an official lockdown yet, it was kind of no one sort of knew what was going on, and a lot of our guests that would eat in the restaurant, they were starting to cancel their bookings that had booked weeks in advance, and we sort of saw a massive drop off. And that was the time where I sort of was like, is this actually happening? Is this real? What's next? Like, what are we going to do? And it was kind of that limbo where none of us, no one in Australia knew what was happening. And, we sort of, as soon as the government sort of said, you know what, it's a shutdown, everyone stay at home. That was sort of when I think in the hospitality industry, we knew where we would stand, so we could adapt more so than it sort of being this like, well, some people will eat out, some people won't. It was just like, well, if everyone can't eat out, then you sort of know where you stand, and then you can adapt and then move from there. So I think that was a real sort of, it was definitely very scary for me as well. Like I sort of, myself, I'm immunosuppressed, so I was sort of freaking out like, oh, what if I get it and I don't know what's going to happen, and I've got kids and all that sort of thing. And it sort of was a really scary time, but it sort of I think us, chefs and front of house, everyone that's in the hospitality industry, this is where we sort of thrive as well and come together and can, evolve and be creative. And that's who we are. We're creative people. And the whole takeaway thing was just another adaptation that we need to move forward and continue to, change and that sort of thing. So it was a really interesting time. It was pretty, as you know, you've spoken to many other people in the industry, and it was one of those things where you just have to push and think and constantly evolve. And that was, something that we sort of were fortunate enough that we could do that as a sort of restaurant. So yeah, it was definitely my boss at the time said to us, don't stress about it. Let's just shut down and we'll just sort of regroup and work out what we're going to do. And me and the general manager, Judith, we sort of, we were like, no, we're not going to give up yet. Let's just like brainstorm and think of what we can do, what people will be able, because, if everyone's locked down, I mean, people still need to eat. People aren't going to, not everyone wants to go to the supermarket and cook at home. There's a lot of people that don't want to cook. So that was, our sort of thought process behind how we adapted and how we changed through takeaway. Yeah.
What's some of the dishes that you created that you wouldn't necessarily do in the restaurant?
Well, I guess, because we're Middle Eastern, because it's sort of like a progressive Middle Eastern restaurant, like slow cooked meats is such a big part of, Middle Eastern food, in the sense that, like, for takeaway, that's a perfect, way of eating. Is it can travel, it's homely, it's delicious, it's got full of flavour when you slow cook a piece of brisket, or whether it be a lamb shoulder or that sort of thing. So it was quite easy. It was a little bit easier for us to sort of adapt to that, because we were already doing that sort of food. And you have breads and you have your dips, you have salads, roasted vegetables. So that sort of dining in the restaurant was actually quite easy to move into a takeaway form. So that side of things I wasn't too worried about. It was more, how can we do it with our minimal staff at the time, because we weren't sure, how busy we were going to be. So we had to obviously cut a lot of our staff, especially our front of house, and, just brainstorming and working ideas how we can get our staff back and still stay relevant and keep pushing forward. That was the main sort of worry for us. So, things like having takeaway alcohol, once those laws came in, then, oh, cool, we can hire someone back that can do all the drinks. And, we're going to deliver all our own food. So then we can get a couple of front of house that can deliver the food, and then they're the delivery drivers. So it just sort of evolved as we went, and sort of really took off after probably 3 or 4 weeks when, the word sort of got out. So the whole the whole basis of what we did was we did a set menu so 5 nights a week, and it changes every single night and never repeats. So that was another thing that I sort of implemented to make it hard for myself and for the team.
Challenge.
Yeah, because I was kind of like, well, when we first were talking about it, me and myself and Judith, we sort of wrote a menu, and we were just going to do our a la carte menu, but it was going to be in a takeaway form, which, you had 15 dishes and people would just order them as they went. And it was a Monday night just before we were going to do all the marketing for it. We'd spoken to our marketing team to sort of organise all the whether flyers or just like online stuff, and speak to the media. And just before they sent it, I just freaked out of my head, and I was like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And then I was like, what if we just do a set menu? You do a bread, a main course, 3 sides, and then a little dessert. And then we charge $40 a head. and then we just get people fed. We're not doing it to make money. We're just doing it to keep everyone employed and just keep it, just keep us alive. And Judith was like, I think that's where we should go, because it's like a unique sort of thing that we can do, and it gives us, we can hire more staff, and it's changing constantly, and it gives us room to always do special dinners or whatever it might be. And it's sort of, it was just a really just a positive way of moving forward, and it just kept us moving forward now, rather than sort of looking at the past. And then we just sort of progressed from that, and it gave us an opportunity to constantly come up with new dishes or new ideas, because it's changing every single day, every single week. So, and we're still actually doing that now as a dine-in concept as well. So it's sort of continued on from that. So I think it's been a really positive idea from, just doing something so simple as just simplifying it, but at the same time making it interesting and changing constantly. So that was sort of how we are now. Yeah.
During the series, many operators have spoken about, once they reopened the restaurant, how much takeaway dropped away, and they even stopped takeaway because it dropped away so much. But I understand you're still doing takeaway. Is that something that you think will be part of the model moving forward for Gerard's?
Yeah, I mean, that was the sort of thing, like the owner of Gerard, one of the owners, Johnny, he's like very much adamant that we keep doing takeaway, which I agree with, and sort of, because we just don't know if it's going to come back, and the virus, that is, and we don't know if if we're going to get shut down in a month's time. We just don't know. So if we've still got that running as an option, it's there, and we have like that following that we gathered from the takeaway, while we were all locked down, and there's still people that order every night, every couple of nights of the week. So we were sort of like, well, let's just, we'll just keep doing it. So we only do takeaway between 5 and 6 o'clock, and then we shut that off. We do a set number every night, and then we basically have our dine-in come through, and there's no takeaway to be seen sort of as soon as the people come into the restaurant. So it's kind of a really interesting model, but it kind of works. It makes it a little bit more work for the kitchen, but it's all for everyone in that manner. But it's good to do it, because it, just in case it does come back, we're still running it and everyone's on board and knows what we have to do. But I think in the future it will be something that we'll continue to do, but we might do it externally, say at the bar or something. Like, we'll keep it going through that. But currently, we're sort of, we probably we're doing half the amount of takeaway that we were doing, or even less, but it's still that little bit of revenue, or keeping those people that don't want to leave their house, because a lot of the people that do order it, they don't have time to go out and eat, and they want to stay home, or they're still sort of, they might be immunosuppressed as well, and they don't want to risk going out. So there's still those people out there that still want that takeaway option of something healthy and, something that's not fast food, So that's something that we kept doing, for sure.
You mentioned earlier that the food that you're doing there is a sort of modern interpretation of Middle Eastern cuisine, but you made a name for yourself at a vegetarian restaurant called Yellow, and also really pushed the envelope with Jewish food with pop-ups like Etelek. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into the industry?
Yeah, basically I started off as a sort of young school kid that worked at a local Chinese restaurant when I was about 14 years old, and I was cooking fried rice and spring rolls just as a part-time job while I was at school. And I sort of started off like that and did hospitality at school. So I'd always sort of had that food background once I'd left school, but I actually didn't go straight into chefing straight after school. I was studying music, believe it or not, and I was studying that for about 2.5 years, and
wow.
Played in lots of different bands and rock bands and things like that. So I sort of lived a different life when I was 18 to 21. Sort of my goals were I want to be a rock star. That was sort of my goals back then, and then that sort of dwindled pretty quick, and that and then I realised how hard it was to live a pretty happy life as a musician, and sort of it was definitely one of those things where I was like, oh, do I keep doing this, or what am I going to get a job out of this? Because there's only so many jobs available sort of in that industry unless you really sort of get it. If you're really, really good or get lucky, I found it really hard to sort of have a stable job. So from then I travelled overseas, and then sort of got the rekindling of the chefing world again, and started my apprenticeship when I was about 21. And from there I just sort of, fell in love with food again, and, worked my way through many different kitchens in Sydney. I got the opportunity to work with Peter Doyle and Mark Best, and got to travel overseas and work in some, 2-3 star restaurants overseas. And it was just one of those things where, I always had a love for food, but I didn't realize it until, I got a little bit older. So it, from here on, I just still have a real passion for it. And fortunately, I've worked for some amazing chefs and people throughout my time, and sort of got me where I am now. So very fortunate to have been able to do what I've done. It's been a while now. It's like 14 years, I think. So it's been great.
After the break, Adam tells us about Jewish cuisine and the inspiration behind his modern interpretation of it.
My grandmother still is one of the best cooks I've ever, all the food that she's ever cooked, that I've ever tasted. And I sort of fell in love with those flavours. I just have these memories of it.
I was cutting off the hocks, and I was just like, these are stunning. The marbling and the texture and the colour was just, it gets you excited to use and cook with those products because it looks so good.
The Crackling is the latest podcast from Deep in the Weeds, where we take you behind the scenes into the kitchens of Australia's best chefs.
If you do the kind of double cook with the spiking, it's crunchy, but like honeycomb almost, like glass, yeah.
And onto the farms of our nation's best producers.
Somebody came along and said, well, there's this opportunity back in Victoria, and it was pig farming. That's sort of how we got into it, and it's been fantastic.
The stories, the passion, the produce.
It was a real life-changing moment for me to see, the respect of an animal that is so deep and such a part of a culture.
The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with Porkstar. Listen and subscribe to The Crackling now on your favourite podcast app. Tell us a bit about Jewish cuisine and some of your favourite dishes that you like to cook, as Edelek, the pop-up that you've done in a few different forms, is close to your heart and a real celebration of that.
I guess like as a child growing up, you as a practicing Jewish boy, you sort of do your bar mitzvah, and then you have all they're called like high holidays, where you do things with your family. It's very family orientated sort of religion, where, well, most religions are, but like especially like as a child, my grandparents they were quite strict Jewish. They had a strict Jewish background, and my parents were a little bit more reform, but we still practiced quite regularly. And my grandmother still is one of the best cooks I've ever, all the food that she's ever cooked, that I've ever tasted. And I sort of fell in love with those flavors. You know, I just have these memories of it. At the time, you sort of take it for granted because you're like, it was kind of like a chore because you had to eat your gefilte fish. If anyone knows what that is, it's basically a boiled fish dumpling. And then back then, you know, you can imagine as a kid turning your nose up to that. And then now I sort of have a real appreciation for it because I know how much love goes into that fish ball. And yeah, just like the matzo ball soup and all those like real traditional Jewish dishes that I ate as a kid. I sort of, you know, as I grew up and had worked in the industry, I only really sort of really appreciated it, you know, probably 5 years ago, till I really sort of realized, oh, this is actually, you know, really cool. Like, there's not a lot of people that get to experience this kind of food. And it was, yeah, I sort of really did a lot of research and just spoke to my parents a lot about, because both my grandparents have passed, but like I sort of really wanted to find out more. I went through all of my grandmother's old cookbooks and just, you know, just read up heaps of stuff about it, and it was just like, oh, there's just this whole other sort of side of my cooking that I sort of didn't take for granted and didn't pursue because I was just focused on modern cooking and, you know, what's hot right now. But like when you sort of look back to your roots, which is what everyone always seems, you know, everyone does, you know, doesn't matter where you're from, you always sort of look back from your memories and you trigger your memories to how you can cook now. And I sort of used all my knowledge that I knew from cooking with, you know, in fine dining. And then I was kind of like, well, why can't you use those ideas and then use the classics? And that was kind of what Edelec was about. It was really triggered memories of what I ate as a kid and what I remember what my grandparents used to cook, especially my grandmother, and how my grandfather used to eat, because his appreciation of my grandmother's cooking was like, you know, I've never seen anyone just like love for food from my grandfather to my grandmother's cooking. It was just it's just one of those memories that I have. There was like this one dish that we did at one of the pop-ups in Bar Rose, and it was, my grandmother used to cook this dish called meat and zaft, and zaft means just basically like juices in Yiddish. So it's basically meat in its own juices. So it has like mushrooms and veal, and it's like this slow cooked meal. And then you have your challah, which is the bread that you have over Sabbath, the Friday night. And I just remember my grandfather the next day, he used to grab the leftover bone from the meat, and he'd like scrape all the bone marrow out, and he'd get his challah from the night before, and he'd like smear it over his challah and like dip it in the sauce. And I was like, I'm sure we could try and like do a dish like that. So I did a dish sort of based on that, and I called it meat and zaft, and it was like this roasted bone marrow with some like roasted challah, and then I made this mushroom sort of dipping sauce, and it was kind of like, yeah, like that kind of memory was really cool, because that was just something I just remembered, and he always did it. And then I was like, that's just such a like genius thing to do, like to eat the leftover bone from the night before and make yourself an open sandwich. Yeah, so like stuff like that was kind of a lot of the dishes sort of came from what my grandfather used to like make, these cool little dishes for himself, like the langosh. Like he'd use the langosh, which is like a fried, I think you've had it when you came there. It was basically like a deep fried bread. And he used to just have his leftover cream cheese, and he'd just like dip his soggy like langosh in a cream cheese dip. And that was kind of where the langosh memory for me was like, usually they sort of grate it with cheese and smear it with garlic, but he sort of just made himself like a thing the next day, and that was kind of like the other thing that I used. So yeah, those sorts of like trigger memories were what Edelec kind of came from. Like just the obviously like a little bit more of a modern take, but they were all, you know, just things that I ate as a kid or what I saw my grandfather eat as a kid, as he was eating. So all those sort of things, that was kind of what Edelec was about. And yeah.
Well, Gerard's Bistro, it's an award-winning restaurant, and you know Ben Williamson was on the pans there, and he's an incredible chef. And what led you to move to Brisbane and take over there in the kitchen? Was there a lot of pressure given the success of the restaurant previously?
Oh, definitely. I think when I first sort of got this message randomly on Instagram from this random person just messaged me and said, "Would you like to come and meet for a coffee? I've got maybe something in Brisbane," and I sort of dismissed it at the time. And myself and Mark, who was the sort of other guy he was the front of house guy from Etelec, and we were on the hunt for a venue in Sydney at the time, and we were really close on this venue in Redfern, and it was like we were just about to get it, and then it just got canned sort of on that day, and I sort of read back on that message, and I'm like, oh, all right, I'll just reply back to this guy. It was, you know, it was even in my like junk message of the Instagram sort of thing, and I didn't even know who the guy was. And I just messaged him back. I said, all right, let's just catch up for a coffee. I'm not really interested in moving to Brisbane, but, you know, I'll meet up with you. I'll just see what you have to say. And the guy just sort of said, oh, they're looking for a chef at Gerard's. And I knew Ben previously. I'd met him a couple of times and sort of spoke with him, and I knew of Gerard's, that it was sort of that progressive Middle Eastern style restaurant. And I was sort of thinking, I was like, well, if there was a fit that I could imagine me trying to, you know, do the food that I want to do, I think that would kind of work. And then I met up with Johnny, who's the owner. He came down to Sydney, and then we met up, and we just got on like a house on fire. And he just sort of, you know, like brought me up here, and I checked out Brisbane. I was like, man, this place is awesome. And, you know, cooked them some food. And then from there, I was like, said to my wife, I was like, how would you feel if we moved to Brisbane? And she, with our 2.5-year-old, and she was like, Brisbane, really? And she was not a massive fan of Brisbane before we moved up here, but as soon as we've moved up here, we're like, I don't think we'll go back to Sydney because we love it up here so much, and just the people up here are really lovely people, and everyone's nice. There's no traffic, and it's hot. It's nice and warm. Like at the moment, it's 20. At the moment, it's a little bit cold, but you know, tomorrow is going to be 23 degrees, and it's the middle of winter. So yeah, I haven't actually. I've been wearing shorts every day this winter, so I don't think I can't really complain about Brisbane weather at all. So yeah, so that just from that sort of, it was one of those split decisions where you know, I wanted. Mark and myself, we wanted Edelec to work. You know, we wanted to try do it as a standalone restaurant, but I think we both realised that, you know, maybe it is sort of one of those things that's more of a pop-up style restaurant. You know, do we want to put all our money on the line for something which we weren't 100% on that it would work in Sydney? Like, especially, I mean, looking at it now, I think it was a very smart decision. And like me and Mark, we still get along really well. And who's to say, you know, in 10 years' time we don't go back and start it up again? But I think, at the moment we just sort of needed to, you know, we'd worked together for probably 7 years or so. So it was good to sort of us to do our own thing for a while. And but now that I've sort of moved up here and I've sort of honed my direction of food quite where I want it to be, especially, and where Gerard's is at the moment, it's sort of right where I'm really comfortable and happy. So I think it was a sort of really strange sort of thing that happened, but it just sort of worked, and really happy about how it all ended up. Yeah.
How are you feeling at the moment, given the lockdown in Melbourne and there's random border closures everywhere across the country, and also with your own personal situation that you mentioned being immunosuppressed? What's the general feeling for you at the moment with moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing in Victoria is just, I'm devastated for, like, I have a lot of friends that have restaurants in Victoria. I have a lot of friends that are down there, and it's just one of those things where they unfortunately got the rough end of the stick out of everyone, and it's one of those things where there's not much we can do about it. I keep messaging them and just say if I can help you in any way, and but a lot of the, like I was saying, like a lot of the hospitality industry, like we're very resilient people. We don't ever give up on anything, and we always are like there for change and progressing. And the amazing thing is like all those guys that've been through 2 lockdowns now, and they're still going, they're still pushing. It's really amazing to see that they haven't given up yet. And I think that's just something that I think the hospitality industry is just so great, like coming together like that. And I think the fact that up here we're quite lucky. Like I said before, we've sort of, because we are quite far away, and it is quite spread out. Our state, we're not. We've sort of got lucky in the sense that we haven't had a second lockdown for now. I keep saying for now because I hope it doesn't happen. I guess and a lot of the guys in New South Wales as well, I've noticed that they're sort of doing it tough as well, I'm sure. I think for me, I'm quite fortunate that we are in Queensland. So I think I'm definitely relieved that I'm in Queensland at the moment, not in New South Wales, Victoria. But I definitely feel for all my friends and family that are down there. I haven't seen my parents for probably like 6 or 7 months because they're in Sydney, and they sort of couldn't come up when they weren't sure if they were going to come up, and now I don't even know when the border's going to open again. So I think it's definitely a tough time for everyone, but I think everyone seems to be adapting quite well, and it's just, it is what it is, and I think everyone needs to learn to live with where we are at the moment. We can't just dwell and say, oh, this is, I hate this, I'm not going to try, or it's just, you just got to keep pushing forward, move on with our lives, and just adapt to how we have to live. Like, it's just, that's what it is. Yeah, it is what it is, and we can't. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
At the top of the show, we mentioned that Gerard's bar was meant to get a makeover and a relaunch and a new menu. It's a very small space. What's your thoughts about bars moving forward, given the circumstances, and is that makeover still on the cards?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely bars at the moment. I think they're really finding it tough because, you've got to have that 1.5 meter rule. You can't have people queuing up at the bar. They need to sit down on a table, and, those laws are still up here like that. So I think, in saying that, I have been thinking about it a lot, is it just means that the food, you need to have sort of like a food offering now as a bar that's, something a bit more substantial to what you used to, because everyone needs to be seated, and, you want people to stay there for a period of time, and they need to spend money, not just on drinks, just on food as well. So I think it will, we're sort of still in discussion of when we're going to do it, just because we weren't sure about the second wave up here. And now I think we're sort of thinking about going back to the original plan. We will obviously have to sort of slightly redesign the inside to somehow fit people in without it being, because it is quite a long, narrow bar. But we do have an outdoor area, which is quite good, which will be able to be used in like a lot better. But yeah, I guess for us, because we can give that food offering, I think we will be okay with it. And that will be really vital in our sort of next sort of phase of the bar, is just make it a food offering as much as a drink offering. Yeah, because it was very much more about drink than food. And now that it sort of gives us a good leverage to do that. Yeah.
Well, mate, from budding rock star, you become sort of an unsung rock star chef. And look, it's great to hear that you got bricks and mortar up there and really finding your voice with the food. Hopefully, moving forward, things remain positive up there and you can keep kicking goals. Love chatting today, mate. And thanks for sharing your story.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.